talk to you about money, because I don't think we talk about it enough. Like, sure, within families, we talk about it, we worry about it, we stress about it, but how often do we step back and question the monetary system that causes many of us so many problems? And today, I want to show you that we can change the way money works, and I want to tell you about some movements from the past and the present that are doing just that. So when I was younger, I did think about money a lot. I questioned it. I didn't know why the world was so unequal. I couldn't get how, because of the country I was born into and my family within that country, I had access to opportunities and money that many others did not. So I thought, I know, I'll go and study economics. That'll have some answers. But I don't know if any of you have studied economics, but I found it quite disappointing. I found a lot of equations and maths and complicated theories. I thought maybe I'm too stupid to understand it, or maybe I just need some more economics. So I did a master's in economics, PhD. But my conclusion is that sometimes economics actually confuses things almost intentionally. And really, we need to ask more simple questions. So today, let's ask some questions about money. My first question is, what is money? So to think about that, I want to ask you all here whether you would accept these different types of money that I've got some pictures of. So I'm going to start, if you would accept this currency off me, if I came to you and said, will you swap this currency for what you've got in your pockets, would you do the trade? So first of all, I've got some dollars. Would you put your hand up if you'd accept American dollars? Yeah, loads of hands. Good, okay. What about the next one? About British pound sterling? Who would take those? Okay, less hands, but still quite a lot, thanks. The next type of money, I might have to explain what it is. It's the one with David Bowie on. This is the currency that I helped co-found, and it's used in an area where I live in London, in Brixton. So would anyone take this currency off me? Not very many hands. Maybe a couple. Okay, good, a couple. Okay, the last one I'm going to ask you about is a gold coin. Who would take this one? Okay, I've got some hands, good. Would you keep your hand up if I told you this gold coin was minted by the so-called Islamic State, formerly known as ISIS? Okay, can't see any hands. Maybe a couple. Okay. I'm doing this so I want you to think about what money is, and it comes down to often if you'd accept money, if you trust who issued it, if you trust what it's made of, or if you trust who's endorsed it. So if you really like Bowie, you might have gone for a Brixton note. So really, money is just trust, nothing more, nothing less than that. But why do we trust some currencies so much more than others? I've been thinking about this question in relation to the currency that I have to use, British pound sterling. Because although we're a tiny island, this currency was the world reserve currency for all of the 19th century and for the first half of the 20th century, up until around World War II when it became the dollar. So why was this? Well, in England we like to tell ourselves it's because we're a very industrial nation. We like to talk about the Industrial Revolution a lot. We teach that in schools. And even on the back of our current £20 note, you can make out there's a picture of an economist, Adam Smith, and a quote that he's saying, which is about manufacturing, and a picture of some manufacturing. But of course, that's not the whole answer. It's also much more to do with what the Queen represents, who's been the figurehead of the British Empire. Now, in England, I don't feel we're very honest about our empire. Like, sure, we still have the Queen sitting in a palace, and she does talk about it commemoratively, as if it was all one big, jolly street party. But we very rarely honestly confront the violence and exploitation that went alongside that story. And when I look at pictures of currencies, with actually one of them with our current monarch's head on, that were forced upon populations in other countries, it reminds me of that history. So here I have pictures, one of them of a currency used in Kenya, where people who opposed the colonial rule were put in detention camps or worse. I have a picture of the monarch before our current queen on a currency issued in India, and it reminds me of the armies that were needed to maintain the British rule in India and its predecessor, the East India Company. So, put very simply, there's often a link between those countries that build up their military power, who are then able to force their economic systems on other countries. I'm talking about my history of England, but of course it applies to other countries, and you might also question why the dollar is currently the reserve currency of the world. There's a really basic relationship between power and money and guns, and yet sometimes we're able to ignore this relationship if the guns aren't pointed at us. But is all this relevant today? Why am I still talking about the British Empire? Well, I think many of the power structures from colonialism are still maintained today. In fact, many of the institutions are still around. If you look at London as a financial centre, you can't understand why it's so big without understanding the role of empire. But of course, our Queen doesn't directly rule over countries anymore. But what it has given way to is a new power that has nothing to do with the Queen, and very little to do with banknotes that I've shown you. This is the global financial system that has no country boundaries and knows no country loyalties. And we're all a part of it, whether we like it or not. For an example of how global finance moves around, just look at the Panama Papers that came out recently. So although the leak came from Panama, many of the roads lead back to the City of London or other financial centres, and then many of the companies then go out to tax havens, many of which are also crown dependencies. I have a few pictures of the currency of the Cayman Islands and of Bermuda with our Queen on it. So what can you do if you don't like the financial system you're part of? It's very hard to boycott money. But I'm part of a growing movement of alternative currencies, people and groups and communities that are trying to create their own money. So I've mentioned it a little bit already, but I, along with a number of other local residents, founded the currency in Brixton in 2009. The newspaper cuttings from the time show some of the small businesses that were a part of the scheme. The currency was designed only to be used by independent businesses and to circulate around them. We initially issued notes, but then realised these don't circulate very well because they looked quite beautiful, so people put them up on their fridge. So we now have an electronic version that you pay by text message on your phone. You can even pay business rates to the local council in this currency. There's a local lottery in the currency, and there's even a cash machine. And to think of why we wanted to do this, to create a currency that can't be banked, only be respent, I like to think of money as being a little bit like blood. So just as blood is being useful when it's circulating around the body, not accumulating, that's how money can be useful in an economy when it's moving. So just like blood, it doesn't matter just how much you have, but how effectively, how fast it is travelling. So in economics, we call this the velocity of money. I also really like this analogy when I think of banks. I think, wouldn't it be great if financial banks worked like blood banks? If they took funds from where there was surplus and injected them into areas where they were lacking. But that is not how most banks work. And in fact, in England, what we're seeing is a continuing investment in property in London. So where I live in Brixton, we're seeing very highly increasing rents, which is forcing out some small businesses and many people that have lived there for years. This is being added to by austerity policies. So there are many cuts to public services, and the local council where I live is actually selling off some of its housing to plug their deficit and making many of their staff unemployed. But is there a different way that local councils could respond to economic crisis? Well, I want to tell you one story from Austria in the 1930s. We're going to go back in time a little bit. So this local council in an area called, probably pronounce this wrong, Wurgl, decided to take money creation into their own hands. So they decided to print their own money, and rather than making their staff unemployed, they paid them in this local currency. So not only did they maintain employment rates in the area, they were also able to do things with this workforce, like build things like houses, a new water circulation system, and leisure facilities. And it seemed to be quite successful, so other local areas came to visit and were going to replicate the scheme, but it was closed down in 1933 by the central bank and declared to be illegal. So unemployment rose again, and what happened next? Well, Hitler annexed Austria several years later. And as I look at my own country, as I see growing intolerance towards others, as I see rising Islamophobia and growing suspicion of refugees, I feel we haven't learned the lessons from history. We haven't remembered that it's times of economic uncertainty, when people are really scared about their livelihoods, that they're attracted to fascism and to extremism. But that's not the only reason I'm telling you about this currency. It also has a really interesting feature, which you might have seen from the picture. It has these little stamps. So these stamps have an important purpose. You have to stamp this currency for it to keep its value. It's like a negative interest currency, or to put it even more simply, it's a currency that decays. So if you try and hold on to it, it will rot like fruit in a fruit bowl. You use it or you lose it. Now this seems quite radical, but in actual fact it's quite a natural thing to happen. Like, think about nature. Think about ecosystems. They normally follow a cycle where some things decompose, and that enables new life to flourish. And yet we've built a financial system based on the opposite process, based on accumulation. But let's go back even further in time. And let's remember that many of the world's major religions actually also didn't agree with charging interest. So it's a key part of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. It's still a feature of Islam today. And I've got this picture of Jesus here because I think he was quite an important economic thinker. He talked about getting rid of moneylenders, not charging interest, writing off debts. I think these are really important economic policies we could think about today. But if we look in the Bible as well, we see talk of debt jubilees every 7 years. Can you imagine that? If we wrote off debt every 7 years, if we set the debt clock back to 0. But we can't start again, we have to go from where we are today. But I think we need to be honest and acknowledge how we got here. And I've talked about two processes. One is violence and expropriation, and the other is the role of accumulation that's paved the way for our current financial system. And what I'm calling for, what I think the new horizons, are not that we trust in bits of metal, not that we trust in a financial system based on debt, and not that we trust in just big corporations who also have their own currencies, but that we put trust in people. But I don't want you to accept my narrative. What I would ask you to do, or invite you to do, is to just ask more questions about money. Ask not just about how much money your country has, but ask about how much money you have. If you have a good salary, where did it come from? Why is there money available for some jobs and professions and none for others? Ask about the bills that you pay. If you rent, why is the rent so high or so low? Who is it going to? But we've made all these questions impolite or taboo, and I think that's just too convenient. We need to ask the questions more and not accept answers like the market has decided it or economics has decided, as if it's something natural. Because these aren't natural processes. Because the money that we use and the financial system that we've created are all things that humans have made. And that means that we can change them if we want to. Thank you.